What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
Our guest on this episode of Educate Everyone is Dr. Nelva Lee. She's the founder and CEO of Concrete Build Financing. Dr. Lee was also the CEO of a vocational school for 20 years, has over 20 years of experience in healthcare, and over 10 years in academia as an adjunct professor for various universities. Now here's Dr. Lee and Dr. Joe Atman.
Well, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for being here with us today. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Definitely. So I'm Dr. Nelva Lee. I am a candidate for Georgia Superintendent of Schools. It is a statewide position. And I am very excited about running because I am very much interested in solving the issues that we have here in Georgia. So Georgia ranks 38th out of 50 in nationwide educationally. That's bad for business, all right? And those numbers have only declined under the current superintendent of schools. We also, 70% of our fourth graders are not reading proficiently at the fourth grade level. That's a decline under Richard Wood's tenure. 76% of our eighth graders are not proficient in math. That is a decline under Richard Wood's tenure. He's going on 12 years, which is most children's entire education from K to 12. And they have unfortunately been under his leadership. And so we have to change. We need a change in leadership. And I propose that I am the best person for the job. I am a homeschool mother. I've been a substitute teacher. I've been a professor. I've been the founder and CEO of a vocational school. So I come at this from the standpoint of the stakeholders that are within our best interests to provide the best education possible for our children.
Tell us a little bit about the school you founded. How did you get into education, and why, outside of the bad numbers in Georgia, why is this job of interest to you?
So I founded interpreting school. Basically, we trained bilingual individuals to become medical interpreters. And that came about because I have a doctorate in healthcare administration. I was the director of patient advocacy at the Grady Health System, which is one of the largest public hospitals here in the Southeast. One of the programs within my department was interpreting. And we found out very early on that it was very difficult to train bilingual individuals to be properly trained as interpreters, because at the time there were very few schools that were available. And this was a problem nationwide. So there were very few reputable schools that provided this training. So yes, someone is bilingual does not mean that they're trained as an interpreter. And so I basically wanted to solve the problem that existed in the industry. And that led to me being very involved in the certification process for interpreters. So that was the other issue. That certification at the time did not exist. So I was the first chair of the National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters. So I was very passionate about this industry and making sure that we had proper training nationwide and proper certification. And so with my leadership, we were able to accomplish just that. And I want to take those same leadership skills and apply them to the school system. We need accountability in the state of Georgia. We need leadership. We need to make sure that our children are reading at the very least. They need to be able to be reading at their grade level, at least by the time they're in third grade. Without reading, that's the foundation of everything else. If they're not literate, they're not able to do math problems. They're not able to do history. We're graduating students that are illiterate. They're going off to college and having to take remedial courses. That's immoral, in my view. If we're keeping these children and wasting their time and not teaching them properly.
Why is Georgia so lacking? I mean, you said it's 38th in the nation. By what metrics? Is that for all education? How does that measured? What does that look like?
Yeah, you can just Google it, educational rankings of the states, and that's where we fall, 38th, and that is a decline. And the reason why we're lacking is we're lacking leadership. At the end of the day, you have states like Florida that have true school choice, and they're number one in the nation. And I would like for us, one of my initiatives is to expand the Promise Scholarship Act that was just passed last year to $8,000 per family, so that families can determine the correct educational environment for their children and not the school system. In Florida, the budgetary system is where the money follows the student. Here in Georgia, the money follows the institution. And this is why we're getting so much backlash from teachers' unions and superintendents, because they know that when a child leaves their school system, say to go to a charter school or to homeschool, that they're going to lose that funding. Whereas if we have it a different way, we scrap the QBE system, budgetary system that we have in Georgia, and we pair it to something similar to what Florida has, where the money follows the student, then that argument goes away. And it's a much better system because we're able to then make sure that students are getting the proper education, that they're able to thrive in learning environments that best suits them. I'll give you an example. So my first child, he was academically gifted. He's actually taken IQ tests, and he's really more on the genius side, but he was also developmentally Asperger's, so he's on the spectrum. And so he was a perfect candidate for homeschool because there's very few systems that are going to be able to accommodate that. And so we were able to homeschool him through fifth grade, where he was able to then do a lot better developmentally among his peers. And then I'll give you another example. My youngest daughter, we adopted her from the foster care system in Puerto Rico. So she came to us not only with a language barrier, but also with a learning disability, since she'd been in the foster care system since infancy. And so we found that for her, since she had so many learning gaps, that a Montessori school system worked best for her because they were able to help her learn how to learn. And we were very fortunate in that we're able to financially be able to do that. Too many families don't have those options, and we need to be able to give them those options because children need to be able to have learning environments that fit them and not the other way around.
And so when you talk about a two-school choice, can you clarify exactly what that means? Is that something that you're proposing to bring to the Georgia school system?
That is correct. So currently we have the Promise Scholarship Act that was signed into law last year. This Promise Scholarship Act allows families whose children are in the bottom 25 percentile in the state academically, if they attend a school that's in the bottom 25 percentile of the state, their child is eligible to go to a private school. However, here's the clincher. A lot of private schools are not taking on these students. They're limiting the amount of Promise Scholarship students that they're taking on. And then you also have the issue, because it's only $6,500. Remember, most private schools cost way more than that. And so the families are still having to put up the rest of that. And then it's only for private schools. So it doesn't really give the families a lot of options. So if I want to homeschool my child, I can't do that under this Promise Scholarship Act. If I want to send them to a magnet school, it's not available. And if you're currently outside of the public school system, say you currently have a child in private school, currently homeschooling, you're not eligible for this Promise Scholarship Act either. And so it's very limiting. It's really a first step. It's a nice first step, but it is not true school choice. And so I would like to expand on what we started to $8,000 per family, and they can use it in any school setting, in any learning environment. And then I would also like to see more expansions of public Montessori schools, more charter schools, more magnet schools in the state of Georgia. We're building $100 million facilities that nobody uses. We need to have more strategic use of our funds and make sure that our monies are actually going to the children that need it. Our literacy rates are dismal, in the state of Georgia, and we're not providing the leadership necessary there either. I find when I talk to preschool teachers, for instance, they don't even know how many letters their students need to know before they are out of preschool. It's very poor leadership and very poor goal setting that's taking place currently in the school system.
Why is literacy so low? And then if that's the case, what should and could be done to change that in your view?
So we see states like Mississippi, for instance, they went back to basics where they started to reinstitute phonics back into literacy curriculum. And we know that phonics works, right? We know that children who learn with phonics, they're able to unlock words for the entirety of their educational journey. If you're memorizing words, if you're using other ways of learning how to read, it's very limiting. For those that learn with phonics, they're able to learn how to read quickly and also be much more proficient later in life. And so we would like to see phonics brought back to Georgia. I know that it was passed in the legislature. However, it's not really a reality on the ground just yet. And so we would like to see that also brought to the forefront again.
And why have people moved away from phonics? I'm a Gen Xer, and phonics was something that was not taught to me. For a couple of years, I grew up in Illinois, and for a couple of years there in the 80s, they weren't phonics, to the best of my recollect. I didn't know. I was just a kid, in school, right? But I was told that we were not taught phonics. And, the Hooked on Phonics was like a big program at the time, but that was being sold separately. I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but it was something that was being offered separately. You saw TV commercials for it.
Correct, yes.
Why is that something that the education system in general has gotten away from, and why is it important to get back to, in your opinion?
We know that it works. But here's the problem. I think the educational system is, unfortunately, it's being overran by lobbyists and new curriculums, new learning methods, and they're all fads, but somebody gets paid, right? So there's definitely corruption that's taking place when you're changing your curriculums and your textbooks and your teaching methods every 3 to 4 years. Definitely someone's getting paid, but the students are the guinea pigs. So they're not getting anything out of it. Teachers are having to completely change lesson plans and the way that they teach. Our parents are having to change the way that they assist their children. Nowadays, parents can't even help their children with their math problems because it's a different way, different math. Same with reading. Things that are so fundamental, why are we changing them? It's because someone is obviously getting paid. Companies are getting paid to come in and consult on new teaching methods. Textbook companies are getting paid to change textbooks. And the children, unfortunately, are the guinea pigs, and they're the ones that are getting the short end of the stick in all of this. So again, I'm pointing back to leadership. It's poor leadership at the top.
And I'm sure that's not just a state issue. I know that Common Core has been implemented across so many states to hold everyone to a certain standard. There's a lot that I think we've obviously learned through the tradition system, which is not really honestly all that old. It's only about 100 or so odd years old. And society has changed so much. People in the way that they approach education in general have changed so much. Their own approach and views on education has changed a whole lot. I'm wondering, has it been your experience? You said also you're a foster parent. Love to hear more about your experience just within education and being a foster parent. Those are students who we're particularly interested in at Middle Tree, the organization that I run. I'd love to hear your perspective on that. But again, I think that education itself is gone through so many fads. And yes, getting the money and the really special interests within education out of education is so important. And as you said, making sure that the money follows the students and their best interests is actually really in all of our best interests, I'd say.
Exactly, definitely. They are the future. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience in foster care. So my husband and I decided to adopt from the foster care system, and we were really impacted by Hurricane Maria that affected Puerto Rico. So devastation that they experienced as a result of Hurricane Maria. And we wanted to do something. We wanted to give back. And it had been in our heart for quite some time. to adopt from the foster care system. Basically, foster care children are the orphans, modern day orphans, and that is very near and dear to God's heart, orphans and widows. And we want to do something. It is said that to whom much is given, much is required. And so we went through the whole process of going through the foster care process to get our family and our home approved. And then we were matched with our daughter. And we went to see her. We went down to Puerto Rico to meet her. And then she came up about a month later. And we fostered her for about a year and a half, and then we adopted her. It's been a blessed journey, challenging at times, but specifically on her education. Like I said, she came to us with a lot of learning gaps. She was illiterate. At the time, she was 8 years old, and she was illiterate in Spanish. Obviously, had no English capabilities. She needed to learn the language. She needed to learn how to read. She needed to learn how to learn. Because of the fact that she had been tossed around from family to family, it was very difficult for her to even know how to learn. And so we found that the public school system just was not meeting her needs. And we put her in a Montessori school, and that was the best solution for her at the time. And she was able to learn how to learn. And she's now in a public school now as a freshman in high school, but she's doing amazing. She's doing amazing now because she had that foundation where she learned how to learn. She started to really enjoy learning, enjoy school, and now she's doing amazing. And she's an award-winning poet. She's doing a fantastic job. But really, truly, parents know what learning environment their child will thrive in. And oftentimes teachers know as well. But the current system gives very little choice to parents on what to do about it. They know what would work best, or they have an idea, but the school system gives them zero choices. That's why I'm such a proponent of school choice.
You mentioned Montessori a couple of times. Mm-hmm. What is it that has worked for your daughter? What is it that you like, that you see than the Montessori system? It's a slightly different approach, and not everybody's familiar with Montessori. Could you talk about your experience there? What that looks like, why you gravitated towards some of those ideas and implements that they have there?
Well, the Montessori system is drastically different from what you see at a regular school. So in a regular school system, children are really expected to be grown-ups so early, right? They're expected to sit at a table at their desk for 6 hours of the day. Very few schools now even have recess. Maybe preschool and kindergarten get recess, nobody else. There's very little manipulatives, right? We have some, but in the Montessori system, it's completely opposite. So kids are expected to move around and to use kinetic manipulatives and to learn by doing. And they're taught how to learn so that they can then have ownership over their progress. So it's a completely different system. School systems like Minnesota, for instance, have a plethora of public Montessoris. We have very few, if any, here in the state of Georgia. So I would like for us to have more Montessori programs, type schools that are available without charge for our parents to choose. So there's so many children that have ADHD or maybe some sort of learning disabilities, whether it's dyslexia or any other type of learning disabilities, where they could really benefit from the kinetic nature of the Montessori system. So it's all about manipulatives and using their hands and using their bodies, and it doesn't penalize them for being kids. It doesn't penalize them for needing to move. And it actually encourages that. The school that my daughter went to had a mini farm where they had to farm, and that was part of their science. It had animals, and they had to learn how to feed the animals and dig in the dirt. She enjoyed school. Let's just say that. She started to love going to school, and then they taught her through manipulatives algebra. She gained so much confidence in herself. It was just a beautiful thing to see her actually flourish.
It's interesting to hear you say that. So why is it that, and not just in Georgia, but all across the nation, I mean, why don't we have more choices for our students so far as what kind of education we can send them to? Obviously, that really doesn't even happen until the collegiate level, generally speaking. I mean, I guess you could go to a vocational school or you could choose some different educational path for yourself. That being said, by and large, more or less, you have basically only one choice for your student to get educated in the traditional way. What do you think we need to do in order to give people more choices? Because this isn't not an overnight fix. Montessori is a different option, but we didn't even know that there were public Montessoris out there. Do know, of course, some public school offerings that do have some different approaches. They're generally really difficult for people to get into.
Exactly.
So how can we make more educational choices available to people? What do we need to start doing? Do we need to start thinking about this on a larger scale, societally? Because again, it's not something you just flip on a switch and say, okay, we're going to change the way that schools do the business of schooling students. So what do we need to do? I mean, it's a huge undertaking and a huge question, but I think a really important one, because it would be so great if we were able to figure out what works best for our third graders or our fifth graders or how, our younger students just in general, rather than just throw everybody into the same sort of system. And that works for some people. It really does, the way we do it currently.
It works for the average. It works for the average student. But if you have an advanced student or if you have a struggling student, it does not work for them. The problem is that over 50%, I know this in Georgia specifically, over 50% of our budget goes to management. It doesn't even go to our children. And remember, education is one of the largest expenses in every county. So in most counties...
in every state, yeah.
In every state, it drills down to every county. So whether or not you have a child in school or not, you are paying for it with your tax dollars. And what are we getting for it? We're getting cookie cutter school systems. That's what we're getting for it. And the reason for that is because it's easy. If I have an assembly line system, it's easy for me to do that. But children are not assembly line products, right? We need to treat them as the individuals that they are. And the only way we're going to be able to achieve that is not from a top down. It cannot be achieved top down. A school system cannot provide individual education to all the children that they have to serve. This is why we need to empower parents and get them engaged. They have their children's best interest in heart. Most parents, there are parents that don't care, but most parents have their children's best interest at heart, and they want what's best for them. And they know, oftentimes they know, okay, my child is not thriving in this system. We want something different. And here's the thing, if we do something similar to Florida, because Florida has figured it out, they're ranked #1 in the nation for a reason. Florida has figured out that the best way to do that is to get parents the funds that they need to move their child if that's what they're wanting to do. Most people, if they had $8,000 and the ability to take that $8,000 to any type of school system, whether it's charter schools, in Florida, by the way, has over 700 charter schools, okay, compared to Georgia's in the 90s. So they have figured out that we need a different approach. They need more options. And because of that $8,000, a lot of options have sprung up, right? Supply and demand. So if you have the funds to be able to take your child elsewhere, then you will have options. There's lots of different charter schools that will pop up, whether it's a Montessori style charter school or some other type of learning environment. But guess what? Parents will then be equipped with say, okay, I have these funds. Now I'm going to look for options, and then they'll be able to match the two. And oftentimes these charter schools that pop up will work with their parents to be able to provide them with some financial incentives. So if the $8,000 is not enough, they'll work with them to be able to payment plans, etc. My point is, if we leave it up to the school system to solve this problem, it will never be solved, because you cannot take care of it from a top-down level. My other second initiative, you mentioned vocational schools, is that when students are in 8th grade, we should already be working towards what they're going to be doing as far as a vocation. Whether or not they're going off to college, we need to be equipping them to be workforce ready upon graduating high school. Here's an example. In Buffalo, in the 8th grade, they start having vocational school fairs. The vocational schools are coming to the 8th graders, sort of like an assembly, and they're looking at the different vocational schools that are available to them, so that by the time they're in 9th grade, they're starting a vocation. Now, whether or not you're going into college, a vocational certification opens doors. So if you're college bound and say you want to be a lawyer, you can get a paralegal certification. And now that allows you to work while you're in college, get experience in the industry that you're wanting to work that. And not only will that assist you once you've completed your college degree to be able to get a good position because you now have experience on top of the college education, but if you decided for some reason that this industry, because you're working in it, is not for you, you would have saved thousands and thousands of dollars because you're now not waiting until after the fact to change your mind. Now, for those that are not college bound, a vocational certification changes the game for them. It's a game changer for them because now they have a career, not just a job. They have a way to pay their bills, to put food on their table. A high school diploma just doesn't cut it in 2025. It's not enough. So we need to be equipping our students, our graduates, for life, not just with a high school diploma. And many students would forego college altogether if they knew that they had a way of being able to provide for themselves without having to get a college degree. A college degree nowadays is a mortgage. That's what you're getting, is a mortgage upon graduating college. So if we were able to say, okay, upon graduating high school, you have this trade certification, electrician, plumber, welding. In the medical field, there's tons of certifications. I mentioned paralegal for the legal field. For technology, you have tons of certifications, Google certifications, etc., that do not require college degrees. If you had something like that, you might decide to postpone college for a few years or altogether.
College is absurdly expensive, and you talk about kind of special interests within education. Colleges have become their own special interests.
They have outpaced inflation. In the 1980s, a Pell Grant used to cover 70% of college tuition. Now it barely scratches the surface. So everybody, unless you come from a wealthy family, has to take out loans. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and they've designed it like that, just like price of housing. That's very intentionally designed to be that way. I think that this is a really important thing to harp on, is how to get people more options, more choices for their students. I certainly hope that you all are able to do that in Georgia, and that you make that a model by which other people can follow. And then some other schmo in another who's hosting a podcast on education can ask somebody a question, and they can reference Georgia as the way by which education should be done. Dr. Lee, where else can people find out information about you and what you're doing?
So my website is drnelvalee.com. That's drnelvalee.com. I have my books on that website. I've got speeches, I've got podcast interviews. So there's lots of information on there to connect with me on that website as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you. And we'll be waiting with interest to see what happens over there.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. One of the simplest ways to improve memory is something that takes just 2 minutes. At the end of homework time, ask your student to quickly review what they studied that day. They can glance over notes, say key ideas out loud, or explain one concept they learned. This quick review helps move information from short-term memory into long-term memory. It's a small habit, but when done consistently, it can make a big difference in how students actually remember later on. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Joe, we've been talking about human beings' constant search for meaning. Well, my question to you here is, what do we ultimately hope will come out of all that searching?
It's a very good question. And sometimes we're so busy just grappling with the day-to-day that we're not even aware that, first of all, we are ultimately looking for some sort of connection to our own lives and some sort of meaning that would come out of that, because there's so many things that we're trying to combat. And we're frequently kind of operating on this frequency of fear and anxiety and a host of things that we feel kind of leave us incomplete in our lives. Even those who have everything, great family, all the money in the world, great health, anything you can name, there's still something that drives people to look for more. And that's kind of the genius and beauty of the human spirit. And then yet at the same time, there's this force that we're constantly grappling with, because we're not sure. We're not omniscient. We don't know everything. So we're always looking to discover and to find out. And that's that's a huge part of the human experience. And there's so much to learn from that. And yet in that discovery itself, there is so much that is difficult to understand and grapple with that we frequently, again, kind of default to this mode of fear and anxiety. And, biologists would tell you that this is a biological thing. I'm not as sure, to be honest with you. I understand that we may have come from a line within humanity that had to deal with things on a more survival base mode. However, where I kind of wonder that if this is really the only place that we get this from, that is our antiquity, our biological history, from sitting around the fire in the cave and having the saber-toothed tiger right outside, and that fight or flight mode kicks in. Where I deviate from being in lockstep with that theory is because of the fact that everything that we have a reaction to is produced by something, and what that something ultimately is our perception and conception of it. Doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing, because physical selves have to still filter through our own consciousness. And so when you have an idea about something, regardless of what it is, it could be a saber-toothed tiger, but your idea of it is that it's like a soft, snuggly, lovable animal. If that's your idea of it, even if it's coming to maul you, you're not going to be afraid of it. And the opposite is true also. And this is what we constantly, all the time, come up against in modern society. There are things that really can't harm us that we are terrified of. And then they do us harm precisely because we let them do us harm psychologically, emotionally, and then ultimately physically. So everything, first, foremost, and last, is going to start with our own consciousness, within our perception, conception, notion that we have of that thing. So the things that, again, biologists say that we connect our fight or flight mode towards still and at the same time have their genesis really and truly in our own concepts and ideas of what those things are. Of course, you can get your concepts and ideas about things through experiences. However, ultimately up to you and your own consciousness and what you decided about your experience, how you define that experience, and how you've decided to let that experience ultimately and truly affect you. So we have this giant mission in our human lives to find this quest for meaning, for any kind of feeling or something that we can connect to. But the task frequently overpowers the inquiry. So we'll take the lesser routes of resistance and we'll manifest things that, again, give us structure. We'll take jobs we don't like. We'll endure relationships with people we don't truly care for. And we'll act in ways that we're not necessarily proud of, largely because of this lack of a will within us to do otherwise. And that comes from a lack of a motivation, where really we ultimately are all shooting to merge with something that's purposeful and speaks to us and shows us what it is ultimately that our lives are meant to be lived for.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.